Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Reserve Team podcast, your home of all things Australian and New Zealand football. My name is Branson Gibson. I'm your host this week for episode 19 of the Reserve Team podcast. With me this week, back again, my good mate, Sean Matheson. How are you, Sean? How you doing, mate?
I'm good, mate. You nailed that in one. Usually people don't see it, but we take 2 or 3 goes with the intro and you have absolutely crushed it out of the park, which I think has set a stellar standard for the rest of the podcast. And we've got a whole bunch of fun stuff to go through today as well.
Well, absolutely. We've started well. We'll see if we can maintain it throughout the whole show, but early impressions are good. I'm happy with that. It's been a little while since our last show, mate. Life has thrown a few curveballs our way, a few things popping up, but we are back. I'm very excited to be back talking all things Australian and New Zealand football. It's been 2 weeks since we've done the last show. It feels like a million things have been happening in the A-League and the W-League. We're going to try to discuss some of the key things. Specifically, we're going to take a look. We're about a third of the way through the A-League season. The W-League season as well has reached its pointy end. So we're going to take a look at some headlines and try to see where each team is at this stage in the season. A couple of headlines, maybe some dream situations, where they're at so far. It's going to be a good one. Just a reminder, though, to our listeners as well, that Weekend Recap is back. It's live on Twitch on Tuesday nights. So Weekend Recap is going to be our home for all the recaps, obviously, of the latest results from the A-League and the W-League. So, Sean, we're not going to double up. We're going to try to stay away from talking about matches specifically and in particular. If you want to hear that, check out the Weekend Recap on Tuesday nights. But mate, we're just going to dive into it, I think, aren't we?
Pretty much, yeah. So the Weekend Recap stuff will also be available on YouTube, so don't stress. We are working on getting it on Spotify as well, thanks to everyone who's been patient while we got some of our episode verified. We can't figure out what we said in episode 15, but Spotify took it down for some reason or another, but it should be back up and running now. We do love our audio listeners. But yeah, we've put together quite a few headlines. Now, Brand, you haven't seen most of these because I've just kind of thrown them. I've thrown them together pretty slapdash this morning, but most of them should be dream headlines that we would think fans of the club want to see. For some of these clubs, it's difficult to find a headline. For some of these other clubs, it's very difficult to pick just one. So they could be interesting and fascinating. I think the way that we'll run through it is I'll jump in, I'll read you the headline. You can tell me what you think the story relates to and what topic around that particular club it relates to. And if we've gotten it right, if we've gotten it wrong, we'll go through, talk about that topic. And if fans of that particular club have better headlines that they would have suggested or issues that they think are more pertinent, they can let us know either on Twitter or down in the comment section on YouTube below. But if you're ready to go, we can start firing through.
Let's do it, mate.
Right, so first one up, we're starting, and we're doing this as well in A-League table order. So Melbourne Victory, down at the bottom, they do start off our list. The headline I've gone with is Training Centre and Academy announced. So Branson, obviously a lot going on at Melbourne Victory at the moment. There's a lot of varied complaints from their fans and supporter groups at the moment about different things that need changing in the club. What do you think is the biggest issue that they're facing, and what do you think a Training Centre and Academy might mean for their future?
I think that is a very good headline. I think with everything going on at the Victory, not to say that it's a crisis, but I have seen on Twitter and some discussion, in Victory fan forums about the club maybe losing a little bit of its identity when it comes to Melbourne at the moment. So Melbourne City, obviously moving out to the southeast suburbs, out to Dandenong. Western United, based in the west of Melbourne, or west of Melbourne, rather than Western Melbourne. Anyway, but for the Victory, they still haven't really sort of got a target area. And I think that a training centre and academy would go a long way to helping resolve that. At the moment, they train in Gosh's Paddock, right next to Amy Park. I think that's a fantastic location. It's a bit soulless. The Melbourne Rebels train there, the Victory train there, the Melbourne Storm train there, the Melbourne Football Club in AFL are based there. You've got Collingwood just down the road. It doesn't feel like Victory's home, in particularly when you compare it to somewhere like Western Sydney, how they've just built up that fantastic academy base. City have the City Football Academy in Preston, and they're talking about building a new one in the southeast suburbs. So I think something like this will really help Victory sort of latch on and it's hard to say that they have an identity crisis, but with those other Melbourne clubs really sort of nailing down their base, it sort of leaves the Victory without one in a way. So I think that something like that, they've looked in Footscray before and a couple of other areas. I really think that'll give them a fantastic foundation to locate the club. And yeah, I just think it'll be massive for them. What do you think, mate?
Yeah, I mean, you touched on it there. That Footscray Park location that I think they were initially looking to build their training centre and academy base in and whatever else actually got torn down by the local council approvals. They rejected it. They wanted to keep it as like a green space. They didn't really want to see any develop in that area. And it is a nice park and whatever else, but it would have been great. It was one of those many, many things that you feel like in Melbourne, if it had been an AFL ground looking to develop, it would have gone through no problems. But because football's always kind of battling and pushing uphill, it's a bit of a challenge. The Victory fan base, I think, I haven't really seen any one individual person, and by all means, I'm happy to be proven wrong. You guys can let me know on Twitter. Articulate clearly what the club needs to fix first. Like, there are people who have been saying the board needs to go out, and that's great and whatever else, but like there isn't a board ready to come and replace them. And to be fair to the board that they've got, they have run the club relatively well for a long time. They do have, relatively good success with Victory in business and everything. They have the highest sponsorship revenues in the league itself. There's still stuff that they are doing successfully, just the football portion is failing them. And I think why we've kind of identified this particular headline is really the teams that have caught them up and then gone above them, like Melbourne City that you've already mentioned, even Sydney FC to an extent with their university partnerships and Western Sydney, are the ones that are really focused on like the infrastructure and development pieces. Whereas for Victory, I think they were confident that they could continue to skate by for quite a while, having either the biggest accessibility to wage budget, being able to pay more for the best local talent or returning talent, and then really just focusing on their A-League program. The W League has picked up in the last 12 to 18 months, which is great, but they've treated it as an afterthought. Their youth league program has never been that successful. Their NPL programs are usually secondary to Melbourne City's, and they're going to have to compete with Western United again next year for the best juniors across Melbourne. So I understand why certain fans are looking to say, okay, well, what's our identity going to be? The path forward for Melbourne Victory might be something similar to the structure that Sydney FC is using, where they're using the Macquarie University facilities. If they were to partner up with someone like a Victoria University, a big one and a big shout out is to La Trobe University, who has worked with Melbourne Heart before, and Melbourne City, and also just got a massive grant for their sporting precinct to build the new home of the Matildas for their football program. So there are things happening at a lot of different university structures within Australia, and particularly within Melbourne, that would lead Melbourne Victory to maybe getting that balance. And if they were to go north and go to somewhere like La Trobe and Bundoora, that would allow them to potentially look at that northern part of the city into the CBD area as being their main section. And it would really give, I think, a clear regional guideline as to where the clubs sit and where the clubs are based, which Melbourne hasn't had comparative with Sydney. They've kept it too generic and too kind of bland. Having said that, will that resolve all the issues immediately? No, it won't, but it'll at least bring them parity for, they've got the same level of elite training facilities available to their squad. They've got the same academy junior programs and structures ready to go. So while they may not be able to pick and choose the best young, Melbourne-based talent, they will at least be able to develop a lot of their own talent internally and hopefully start to increase the players that they're bringing into first-team football. They've had a couple of young players come through this year. Markovic, the fullback, he looks to be a decent prospect, but other than Lee Broxham, they haven't really had anyone that came through as a youth player that's played his career all the way through at the club. Most of their team is recruited either internationally or domestically, and I think this would help get them back on the right track and hopefully relieve a bit of the pressure on their board and their fan base.
Definitely, I totally agree on that. You touched on a couple of things that I just want to touch back on. The Victory almost seem homeless. Well, not homeless, but they don't necessarily have a space that they can call their own. Even Western United, I know they're sharing with Caroline George Springs, in the NPL. They sort of have a location, they've got plans to build a stadium. Same for Melbourne City and Dandenong building that academy. Whereas the Victory, they share Amy Park, they share Marvel Stadium, they share Gosh's Paddock. Nothing is purely theirs. And then touching on the academy as well from a footballing point of view, I think that'll be huge. You look at the Sydney FC Academy, the players that they've been able to transition from there into the first squad. The same thing for Melbourne City. You look at Adelaide United, how they're just sort of seemingly able to unearth prospect after prospect. From a footballing point of view, an academy would certainly help the Victory in that regards.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think maybe the frustration, and I don't want to give too many of the frustrated Victory fans that much validation, because some of it is over the top. But for the majority of them that are relatively level-headed, it would be very frustrating for them to look at their own club, which has had largely like 15 to 20,000 members for 16 years, not able to make these like financial and facility management plans the way that. So Western Sydney hasn't actually existed that long, really, but they've had consistent fan support around that 11,000, 15,000 mark. They've had continued investment from either board members or sponsors or whatever else to get that academy structure up and running, and they prioritise getting that infrastructure in place as soon as possible as being their key item. It's crazy that teams that didn't exist, Melbourne City's kind of a different scenario because they're a little bit more bankrolled, so that's not really a fair comparison to make, but I think Western Sydney is a really good alliteration about someone who put the football aspects and the football development side of it first, and they are, you know, with the likes of Tate Russell, Daniel Wilmering, a bunch of other players kind of coming through that academy structure, starting to see the fruits of that over the next few seasons. So hopefully that will work out for Victory. Hopefully we'll get that announcement before the end of the season, but we're going to move a little bit further north and a little bit up the table as well, to the Newcastle Jets, and the lead headline I've gone with is new ownership provides stability. Of course, much was made during the off-season about the Newcastle Jets ownership group. They're currently owned by kind of a conglomerate of clubs at the moment, including Western Sydney and Sydney FC, which is a little bit strange. You don't see that often in world football. But Brand, what are some of your thoughts on what the Jets need and what this headline might mean for them?
I think that headline would be huge. I think it's hard for Newcastle to ask for too much more than that. I think the key word there is stability. It would just remove so much uncertainty about, like, you know, who's going to finance the club. Like, there was stories coming out that the previous owner hadn't put any money in since December 2019. So, like, how can you afford to pay staff, pay player wages, invest in, you know, the facilities, the academy, merchandise, all that sort of stuff. So, like, not only would it provide stability, but I think it would provide a very strong foundation or a launch pad for the Jets to make a revival, a bit of a resurgence. We've seen that this year so far. I know now that other teams have played more games and their ladder position has slipped, but they are doing, I think you'd agree, better than we anticipated. Start of the year, I was all doom and gloom on the Jets. I'm like, they are going to be woeful. And this year, I've sort of been, you know, pleasantly surprised at how competitive they've been. So they've got the potential to sort of keep building on top of that, and a new owner and the stability that that would bring would be instrumental. I still don't think, as far as I know, they haven't got a confirmed coach. Is that correct? Like, the coach is still just a caretaker role, right?
It's confirmed till the end of the season. So they haven't announced that, like, Craig Deeds is going to take the role on permanently or anything like that. But it actually came out relatively quickly in that flurry of information about the ownership change, and with the league actually propping the club up, that he was going to be put in place for the rest of the season. I think I remember seeing it on Twitter with a little graphic there, but it's only to the end of this year. So still not the long-term structure that you think they want to be building in that area. No,
and like a new ownership group, that stability and that foundation for attracting a coach, whether it's a new coach or new marquee players or big foreigners or anything like that, it would just be so crucial. And then even for fans, you know, there's nothing worse. Like, I mean, we were Heart fans than being uncertain. Like, is our club going to fold? Are we going to be around next year? How can you get involved when? So you don't want to get like too emotionally invested, just have the club shut down. And I'm not saying that the Jets are about to shut down, but, you know, with the lure of Canberra and the Mariners have been going through like that. Will the franchise be relocated? Will it fold or whatever? As a fan, that's pretty taxing. So I just think it would just be so much stability, and I think it would be a great foundation for a resurgence. What do you think?
Oh, look, I agree entirely. I think Newcastle, perhaps in terms of like the ownership stakes, have been the most strained of any of the A-League clubs. Like, thinking back to their initial A-League era, Con Constantine, while he did love like the Newcastle area and obviously cared about the club quite a bit, he was an erratic figure. Like, he did some strange things relating to both the old Newcastle United in the old NSL era and then bringing them across into the A-League. And he, I think, very much realised in the A-League era he was going to run out of resources and funding quite quickly. Then they had Nathan Tinkler come in, and that sounds like a dream owner where you've got like a billionaire from the region who's like heavily invested in mining and obviously has stability and income and all that sort of stuff, who just really lost interest in football very quickly. We haven't had the greatest record between Palmer and Tinkler of like mining magnates getting involved in the game and like really not losing interest with their toys 3 weeks down the track. And then really the idea was
very quickly.
Yeah, go for it.
Sorry, at least BHP haven't pulled their sponsorship of Perth Glory yet.
Very
Sorry.
true. Very true.
Crap injection for a crap joke. I apologise. Back to you. I won't interrupt again.
It's fine. BHP is synonymous with Perth, so it's the perfect sponsor. But then also like the Ledman Group, when they came in, like a huge Chinese conglomerate LED lights company, you'd think that's relatively secure. You'd think they'd have a very diverse portfolio. The economy over there tanks a little bit. The club just stops paying people over here, loses interest entirely, and then eventually has their license revoked. It wasn't even a sale. So yeah, like they've probably had more strained ownership issues throughout the course of their history. Maybe the Mariners is the only other one that you could run a comparative base to just because of their limitation in funding. But yeah, for them, like if they can get some sort of stability to do a lot of the things that we're talking about with other clubs, similar to Melbourne Victory, like can they get their academy back set up? Can they get their W League team training more frequently? Can they get their A League players like more lucrative or multiple year contracts? Can they get a coaching style or structure in there that's going to be there for 3 to 5 years and start building that kind of long-term future and succession? So again, I'd echo your sentiment. I still don't think they're great. I still think they are still a chance to finish on the bottom of the league, but they're having a crack, and that's really the most we could ask for them given all the challenges they've had this season. They're really attempting to try and be a team that Newcastle can be proud of, and you know they are trying to do the right things to remain competitive in the division, which they deserve a ton of credit for. But another team that deserves a ton of credit, Bran, that we're going to jump into now is the Wellington Phoenix. Now, the headline I've gone with is the Trans-Tasman travel bubble opens for all. Of course, Trans-Tasman, if you are watching internationally or listening in, is Australia and New Zealand. We haven't been able to travel between those two countries outside of emergency reasons for about 18 months, which has been hugely challenging for the Phoenix in particular. They are currently, if you're not already aware, and if you're not, where have you been? It's all over Twitter every weekend, playing out of Wollongong. They're training at the University of Wollongong. They're using Wollongong Wolves. Sorry, is it WIN Stadium still? I've completely forgotten the name, but it's one of the more picturesque stadiums in Australia, if you haven't seen the photos on Twitter already. Wollongong deserves a tremendous amount of credit for the way they've brought Wellington into the fold. Wellington deserve a ton of credit for the way that they're trying to integrate themselves into the Wollongong community. That red kit is fantastic. More about that in a little bit. But the human element of that, being away from friends, being away from family, sleeping in your own bed, all that sort of stuff, it does take a toll. And I think it does have an impact. And we've seen that in the way that Wellington have kind of studied. Still very talented, still a good team, but they've got some good results lately, but they aren't necessarily able to like live their best quality of life at the moment. So opening that bubble up would be fantastic for them. But Bran, for Wellington, do you kind of agree with this headline, or is there anything else that you'd like to see for them?
I totally agree with that headline. I think that would be huge for the club. I think they have done a fantastic job of being able to, you know, still compete in the A-League and not have to withdraw from the competition entirely, which, you know, when we went back to the initial lockdown, that was, you know, a strong possibility. So I think the way that they've been able to relocate to Wollongong last season during the interrupted season, and then again this year, has been phenomenal. Last season it was Sydney, this year it's Wollongong. I think that's phenomenal. And I think it's so hard to sort of underestimate how difficult that would be. Like, you know, all the staff that have to move, and it's not just the players, it's the coaches, it's the physio, it's the media team, it's everything, the ops manager, the teams manager, everything that goes into running a football club, all that stuff behind the scenes, you have to pick up and move. And if you can't pick up and move it, you've got to try to do it remotely, which just makes it even more difficult. So I think being able to play in Wellington would just be a huge, huge, huge benefit. I think the Wellington fans as well, they've been unfortunate. When was the last time they got to watch their Knicks play in person? I'm imagining it now. The first game back in Wellington, they're ahead, 80th minute, shirts come off, the yellow fever going absolutely nuts. It's going to be fantastic. I think that'll just make things so much easier for them from a footballing point of view, because not only are they trying to compete, they're just trying to survive. Well, not survive, but they're trying to like live properly, if that makes sense. I don't know if I've explained that very well, but they're just trying to like
it definitely
get through
does.
Everyday life.
Yeah, and like the players and the coaching group and all the staff and stuff that you've mentioned deserve a ton of credit, but so does like the Wellnix group, the ownership group, because there's no scenario at the moment with them like renting accommodation in a different country, not having like home games and home support to fill out their stadium and make back that revenue. There's no scenario where they're not losing a ton of money at the moment, but they're kind of taking that hit to keep elite level football available for people in New Zealand. Like whenever people kind of go back and go through that Knicks out stuff about what's it bringing to Australian football, like they're doing a lot for New Zealand football, and they're doing a lot to try and keep this competition as high quality as possible, and like having a buy round every week wouldn't help anybody. So like a huge credit to them. So hopefully it does open up. They do get to go home. We do get to, by the end of the season or before the end of the season, see some sort of A-League football being played in New Zealand. I think that would be fantastic for everyone.
And just very quickly before we move on, I think Wellington as well deserve a ton of credit for the stuff they've been able to do to really embrace Wollongong and really thrive. Like the stuff that they've been able to do with, the Mexican fans with Davia. Like, I don't know if the club organised that, but they all have a bunch of, yellow Wellington Phoenix flags that it seems like they just sort of hand out to everyone. So while they might not have organised it, they've really embraced it. And the Wollongong Appreciation Month, that whole plan, that is absolutely phenomenal. That's a fantastic initiative. And I think they deserve a ton of credit for trying to turn this really unfortunate circumstance into a massive positive, and I think they've done that very well.
And it's a topic for a future podcast, Branson, but if we do end up with Wollongong in the A-League in the next few seasons, I think Wellington deserve a ton of credit for showing how viable it is and how active and wonderful that supporter base is and how keen they are to get around some sort of football support at the top tier.
If we end up with Wollongong in and Wellington in the A-League, we could end up with not like our first friendship match. Like, it wouldn't be a rivalry. It'd be like two old friends catching up again. Like, they wouldn't hate each other. They'd just be like, oh, you helped us survive. We helped you survive. Like, it would just be the nicest. I don't know. Like, you can't even call it a rivalry. It would be so bizarre. Anyway, off topic.
Yeah. Anyway, I think the Fire Chicken Derby is still going to be alive and well at some point in the future between Wellington and Wollongong, but hopefully that comes through relatively quickly. Another side heading back up the table. We're now up into the 9th spot. We're going to make the jump over to the other side of the distance derby with Perth Glory. Now, I've gone with the headline, New Football Investors Join Sage. Now, Perth is kind of a weird case at the moment. They've played the fewest games in the competition with 9. They've had some great results. They've had some poor results. So it's hard to be super critical of their on-field performances, even though I don't rate them as highly as a few other people do. But the big one that I've gone with is New Football Investors Join Sage. Now, Tony Sage, the current owner, has basically propped up Perth Glory all throughout his reign and pretty much the entirety of the A-League era with very little additional financial support from anybody. There is still a large footballing community in Western Australia. They do have a very robust NPL program over there. They've got state leagues underneath that. They've got some big clubs, the likes of Perth Soccer Club, ECU Joondalup, who's developed a whole bunch of Socceroos talent throughout the course of the years. They have that, but then it still always seems to fall on Tony Sage to keep them at top tier domestic level each and every time. And anytime there's expansion talk, there's usually small rumblings about another Perth team, but no one's ever willing to put the money together for it. None of the WANPL teams seem that interested in National Second Division. There's only 2 that are currently in the 55 group working plan for that, and they're not the ones that we would have expected. But Branson, for Perth Glory, what do you think getting more additional football involvement would mean for them, and what other headlines do you think may have potentially applied to them for this season?
I think it would be huge. We saw, what was it? I can't even remember how long ago. Sorry, with what was the name? Sorry, the British football investors who were going to buy Perth Glory, and then it turned out they were scam artists. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, so it was the Bitcoin stuff.
Totally blank.
It was London Football Exchange.
That's it. Yeah, that's it. Sorry. Yeah.
It was all on there were no press conferences. There were no formal declarations from the business. It was all Instagram and TikTok stories from the CEO. Tony Sage was actually given a role on their board. I'm not sure if he still maintains that role and it's continued on, but it looks like he kind of maybe got a little bit tricked on the internet as to how lucrative they were, how much money they had, all that sort of stuff. But thankfully that didn't work out. Now I think what they need is some local football investment for WA to get WA football better represented. But yeah, by all means, continue.
Yeah, so it seems like it might have got a little bit Nelly Yowered by that, lured in, yeah. But I think, so my point going back to that was it kind of shows, the rumours were that he was going to sell the club. So it kind of shows that, not that he's willing to sell it, not that he's looking for a way out, but he is looking for, ways to get more investment into Perth Glory. So I think that it would certainly help a little bit. It might provide more direction, more stability. I think the headline for Perth as well, it should be a bit of a merge between Newcastle, what we were saying, where more investment provides a little bit more stability. And then the other one that I would add just a smidge to would be similar to Wellington, where if there was no longer any travel concerns with WA, like no concern about them closing the border. We saw that happen earlier on in the season when the Glory were on their Melbourne trip. We've seen their W League team suffer as well, where there's been uncertainty about whether they're going to be able to play interstate. This week, there was the virus outbreak in Brisbane, a confirmed case, and then there was rumours that WA was going to close their border to Queensland again. I don't think that would have impacted the Perth Glory directly, but that sort of is something, while it isn't inevitable, it just sort of seems to loom over Perth, where that could just throw another spanner, another curveball towards them that might just make things even more difficult. They've already played the fewest games. So I think a big headline for them would just be like no more border closures, no more interruptions, because if there's more game delays and then their season becomes even more condensed, that could really be a problem for them as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And like they do run on a hair trigger. Like they don't waste any time locking down that border to states that get infection rates, which credit to them. Like they've got to do their own stuff, and obviously hugely supported in WA based on their recent election results. But that's an entirely different podcast topic. We'll leave that to the experts to talk about that one. But 3 weeks, no community transmissions in Victoria as of today, so we're crushing it as well. Hopefully for the rest of the year, everyone stays safe and healthy, and it doesn't put any further like delays for the league at risk, because we're nearly all caught back up, and nearly every team's now played 12 games, which would be absolutely fantastic because it makes our power rankings that much easier. Heading up the table a little bit further, though, another side that's been up and down this season, similar to Perth, it's Western United. Now, I have gone with the headline, Identity Found in the West, basically because there are a variety of different challenges, but there's a couple that I specifically wanted to kind of highlight with you, Branson, where at the moment, if Diamante's not playing, what is Western United bringing to the league is obviously a big portion of it. He's been injured the last couple of weeks, hasn't started games, and they haven't looked fantastic. If they're not the Diamante club, like what are they? And then the other additional challenge that we've actually discussed on the podcast previously is their challenge relating to finding a home. Similar to what we spoke about Melbourne Victory needing that training base, Western United really need to find themselves some sort of consistent place for their fans to go and watch them play football. They've trialled Geelong, and now looks unlikely that they're ever going to return to Geelong due to challenges logistically and with the GMHBA Stadium and their availability, given AFL's prioritisation there. They've played in Ballarat, where they've got mixed crowds and mixed results. I think they got their first victory in Ballarat a couple of weeks ago at the start of the season. They have now announced that they're going to be playing games in Tasmania. They have also been very vocal about using AAMI Park, which of course they are sharing at the moment with Melbourne City, Melbourne Victory, Melbourne Storm, Melbourne Rebels, a whole bunch of other different teams. It's a very busy ground at the moment, AAMI Park. But for Western United, what do you think their biggest challenges for this season, and how do you think they can drive an identity that isn't necessarily centred around their ongoing stadium concerns or Diamante himself?
Well, that's a tough question, because I think they are the two biggest concerns. I think one of that sort of encompasses all of that. If I was Western United, I would be afraid about losing momentum. So obviously when they first come into the league, there's a lot of excitement. You're able to there's a lot of vigor or enthusiasm around the community. We're like, great, here's something new. But they don't want to get stale. They don't want to get stagnant. And the longer that they go without that home, as you said, the chances of that happening increase, I think the big headline for them that I would love to see is like ground broken on their home. Like their biggest thing has been that they're going to build their own stadium. And there's been a lot of stuff in the works. Is that going to happen? Who knows? But like, as far as I know, they haven't even broken ground. So there's all this talk that they're going to build it. They say it's going to be done. Then there's talk of delays. Then, it's all over the place. So I would like to see it actually start, it actually begin. And that's when they can really sort of build on top of that. Yep, okay, it still might take 2-3 years for the stadium to be up and ready and for them to be playing home games out of there. Like we saw with Western Sydney, I think they spent like 2 seasons playing around before they could go back to Bankwest. But I think that would just sort of signify that progress really is being made. Because as you said, I mean, you reeled off the names of all the places they're playing at the moment. They are literally all over the place. West of Melbourne, Tassie, Ballarat, Geelong, like it's ridiculous. So I think that, breaking ground on a stadium or on their home training facility is going to be massive, because then they can just sort of piece everything together. Yeah, they've got a partnership. Sorry, wrong time to take a pause. Okay. They got a partnership with Calder United in the NPLW in Victoria, and that's fantastic. They want to build on that. They've got a partnership with Caroline George Springs. or Caroline George Cross, sorry. I can't. What are they named?
It's
Anyway,
Caroline Springs George Cross. And as our NPL representative, you need to be aware of that. Like, I look to you for guidance, but all good.
I know. I've said it 5 times. I haven't got it right.
It's fine. They don't have an active Twitter fan support. We should be fine with that one.
Yeah. Anyway, so like, I just think that would be really, really good. I don't want them to get stagnant. I don't want them to get stale, and I'm afraid that that's sort of happening. And that's what you touched on with Diamante. An extension of Diamante, Besar Berisha. What happens when he retires? Like, he's obviously a huge A-League personality. He's the A-League's all-time leading goal scorer. Love him or hate him, he's fantastic for the league. So when he goes as well, it's sort of like, well, what have they got? I don't know. It's like, what are we relying on? You haven't got a base. You haven't got a marquee. A foreigner being Diamante and Berisha, who's also a foreigner, but he's an A-League identity. So I think, yeah, I don't know how do you sum all that up, but I think they need a stadium because that just sort of signifies progress and stuff that is actually happening for me.
Yeah, 100%. And look, they have recruited well. Like, I have to give him credit. I think Berisha is a unique case because he's probably got like a lifetime contract at North Sunshine when he eventually retires. But the Albanian community loves him and gets around him all the time. The guys they brought in, Guarajena has been excellent. Victor Sanchez has been excellent. Tomoko Amai, I think, is very underrated in the division. So they do get quite a bit right in terms of their recruitment and development and growing those kind of international talents. But it is still the Diamante club. And it's the Diamante show. Even when he's not playing, they're talking about what would happen if he was. And even if he's on the bench, they're talking about when are we going to introduce him? When are we going to see him? Part of that's because we have a pretty shitty broadcast quality at the moment. But then at the other time, that is the reality. He is key and critical to so much of what they're doing. Yeah. The frustration portion about the travel and the transport and whatever else, and I'm trying to echo the views of the fans. And then my own personal view is that if they're going to go play games in Tasmania, why didn't we give Tasmania a team in the first place? If they're going and now looking at these other markets because they're struggling to fill AAMI Park, because they're struggling to find, suitable grounds. They did talk about using Melbourne Knights Stadium, Summer Street, based in North Sunshine, which is more northern suburbs than western suburbs, but still they're trying to get a local identity in that area and make it easier for their fan base. It's just, they need to do something. Their building model or their funding model for the stadium is based on they're going to sell off the surrounding grounds to developers to either build shopping centres or residential homes or whatever sort of land development you want. And they actually have to complete those sales to gain the revenue to build the stadium. So the longer that takes, the more that kind of eats into their budgets in terms of what's going to be left over to build that stadium. And it could take 2 or 3 years for them to subdivide and sell off all that land portion. Or there could be no interest in the housing market given what 2020 has provided and coronavirus and all that sort of stuff globally. So I think there's still massive question marks over what they're going to do. I would be content if they sign a 5-year partnership agreement with a location like Whitten Oval or something like that in the western suburbs, or even one of the community stadiums out towards Werribee or something like that. I think that would be a good interim solution to say, we're doing this for the next 5 years, and then after that portion, we're going to be into the stadium. And that's our plan, that's our focus. Because right now, none of us have any idea when it's going to start and how long it's going to take.
Yeah, definitely. And just just a couple of other really quick things before we move on from Western United. A lot of this stuff is great plans. We've seen as well that they're going to build a training base. They've got agreements with the Wyndham City Council for community grounds, and it's going to have a 5,000 seat pitch that's going to be the future home of their W League team, and then it's going to have community pitches out the back. And these are all great ideas, but that's what I was sort of getting at when I said I just want to see ground broken. I want to see it transition from great ideas to actually something that's going to exist. And very, very quickly on Diamante, I don't think there's a huge issue with them being the Diamante club. We've seen that with other A-League teams as well, like Sydney FC when they had Del Piero. He was the main focus of them, and that was okay. Even Melbourne City when they had Tim Cahill. I don't think that's a huge issue, but those clubs were able to there was something before him and there was something after those players as well. So I think Western United have to be prepared to have an identity afterwards, but I don't think it's a bad thing necessarily that they're so Diamante focused. And there's plenty of other marquees who you could name. Shinji Ono for Western Sydney, how important he was. The list goes on. But anyway.
Yeah, and to be fair, like if you drop Diamante into pretty much any of the A-League clubs,
Yes.
they're going to become a Diamante-centric club because he's such a good player. He's an incredible
Yes.
talent. But I think like it kind of echoes back to what we were talking about Melbourne Victory in a way to start off the podcast. If they go much further without putting down those roots in the West, people are going to start looking at other alternatives or other options, or they're going to not necessarily identify Western United as being truly representative of their area. You have a limited window for that engagement piece. Melbourne City got a second chance by sheer dumb luck that nobody else moved into the southeast region, and credit to Team 11 for like continuing to pursue A-League football by any means necessary, even relocating a club. Like, yeah, the shame would be if Western United never find the funding to actually get this stadium up and running, because it's the entire reason they were given the license. That, and they paid the highest fee for any license ever handed out by the FFA. But, you know, David Gallop's like shortfalls and pitfalls could fill an entire podcast on their own. But we've gone through it in a great deal. Western United fans, let us know in the comment section below or Twitter if there are other things that you would think need to be covered off this season as the key changes required. Heading up the table again and further north in the country, we go to Brisbane Roar. Now, Brisbane they started the season really well, Branson. They were looking really good, playing out of Redcliffe. The additional humidity up there during the summer months was like actually killing some teams that they put in some thoroughly dominant performances. They probably should have beaten Melbourne City round one. We managed to snag a sneaky little 1-0 away victory, but since then, the wheels have kind of come off a bit. I think as additional teams have gotten more conditioning, additional teams have like gotten back into like training habits and whatever else, particularly for New South Wales, Victoria, the most hard hit with lockdown restrictions, being unable to train, all that sort of stuff. Their results have fallen off a little bit as well, and they now sit outside the six for the first time this season. What the headline I've gone with is boutique football venue for Queensland. So I'm kind of trying to parlay this into 2 points for us to talk about. One, do we think Redcliffe has been successful for them and that move this season, the jump from Suncorp to a smaller boutique venue? And then two, what would a boutique football venue for Queensland mean looking forward to like the 2023 World Cup and whatever else comes with that? But what headlines do you think would have been appropriate for Brisbane?
I think that's a big one. I think that is a huge issue. And full disclosure here, we're from Melbourne. We live in Melbourne. I've never been to Brisbane. So when it comes to the geography and all that sort of stuff in relation to Brisbane, I don't know anything about it. So like when it comes to Redcliffe and, you know, the transition time and driving, full disclosure, I don't know a lot about it. So, but from the outside looking in, it looks like Redcliffe has been a fantastic success. Like even when they're playing there, the biggest problem with Suncorp is it just looks so empty and it sounds so empty. It's a massive stadium, which is great when it's full. And when, you know, the Brisbane Roar were winning 3 titles in a row, and when they were having grand finals at that, you know, it was fantastic. I was watching highlights the other day of their grand final against the Central Coast Mariners. It was fantastic. It was phenomenal. I'm not saying that they should abandon Suncorp altogether, but I think that, you know, Suncorp should be reserved similar to how Adelaide United play at Adelaide Oval for big games, and their base is at Coopers. I think Brisbane want that same kind of model. I think Dolphin Stadium in Redcliffe, I think that fits the bill. Again, full disclosure, the geographic, you know, ins and outs and the logistics about it might be more tricky. And so Brisbane fans might be, will definitely be in a much better place to discuss that. But I think the impact that the venue has is fantastic. Like you can take fewer people and you fill that stadium up, and the atmosphere is 1,000 times better than what it is at Suncorp. And it's just, I think that would really help. You know, we keep talking about identity and we don't want to like keep coming back to the same topic. But again, we're going to come back to that same topic. I think that would really help them. Give them a home, give them, you know, their own stadium that they can really create a fortress at. I think that would be great.
Yeah, and potentially, like, it's one of those scenarios where they need to, like, kind of develop that base and find that position so that they know what they are. Like, Brisbane is a vague term. So I have been to Brisbane, but I'm not going to claim to know, like, what the traffic's like heading to Redcliffe on a Friday night or anything like that. Like, we don't have that level of visibility. But we know that there were people during pre-season that said they weren't going to get memberships because it was going to take them, like, an hour and a half to get to games from south side of Brisbane and then an hour and a half back. And then, like, they get consistently delays for lightning and all that sort of stuff during storm seasons. They've had delays due to other kickoffs, and people haven't been leaving that stadium in Redcliffe until like 11:30 local time. So I can understand why it's frustrating. I can understand why it tends to limit the people that can go to the games, but echoing your statement, it looks so much better from a broadcast perspective. I think the team starting the season really well was a response to like how much they felt like the fans were there, right there with them, supporting them. Even when Brisbane Roar were winning like their league titles and stuff during the Postecoglou era, they it still feels cavernous because the fans are so far from like the goals. So like even when it was full and even when they had that like full away bay and a big active support and all that sort of stuff pushing the team home, I'm sure the fans could hear it, but like from our outside perspective looking in, it still looks cavernous. And that's the way that it's described by everybody. It's never really high in terms of like the atmosphere of results from like the PFA findings where they do their different fan base resource and voting and they do their player group resource and voting. Same with the playing pitch, all that sort of stuff. So I think the move has shown that there is potential for a boutique football venue in Queensland. You just want to hope that like the very rugby league centric and rugby union centric governments in that area are looking at it and saying, okay, there is a demand for this, of something of like a 10 to 15,000 seat size. Can we try and find it, and can we leverage that to try and get ourselves some games for the 2023 World Cup, which is, of course, looming very quickly. They'd have to move very fast, but thankfully they do have places like Perry Park. I've forgotten the name of the other one that Rugby Union uses. It's completely escaped me, but there are venues that they could redevelop pretty quickly to get up to standard and up to snuff for an A-League season. But we will continue on because we are covering quite a bit relating to stadium stuff. I haven't gone with stadium-related stuff or title stuff for all of the clubs, but for some it is more important than the other. One of which is Macarthur FC. Now, of course, they are in their first season. It is difficult to kind of measure how well they're doing at various points. It was only 2 weekends ago that they were actually in second spot in the division. 2 bad results. They dropped down to 6th. Such is the nature of the table at the moment, how congested it is between 2nd and 8th position. But the headline I've gone with is Bulls on parade to the finals. I think given where they've started, some of the performances they've put together and the fact that they are still sitting in the top 6, if they fail to maintain that throughout the course of the season and not make finals, I think they will lose a lot of the engagement that they've made. They have made good inroads in Campbelltown. It's tough when you move into an environment that has been largely dominated by either Western Sydney or Sydney FC, given that they had a head start with time. They've done relatively well. They've got a good couple of things. Like the cowbells is unique. I've not seen that anywhere else in world football. They've got stuff that needs work, more on their active support to come, more on the actual on-field results, more on Ante Milicic's behaviour in press conferences as well. But Bran, what do you think the big issues are at the moment for Macarthur, and what do you think their key headline would be to resolve by the end of the season?
Well, I think that's a good headline to go with. I think making the finals would be the goal. Started the year when we did our Football Manager League prediction sim. I think we had I think it had Macarthur winning on I think it had Macarthur winning the title this year. And that sort of goes to show, and we've said it the whole way through, where on paper they look really, really good. They look like they should be successful. So obviously games aren't won on paper, but when you have a strong side that should be performing well and then doesn't, that's frustrating from a fan point of view. And in particularly early on, particularly in Sydney, where there's so many, and New South Wales, where there's so many clubs, Sydney, Western Sydney, Newcastle, Central Coast, Canberra looming as well. It's a very competitive market. It's a very competitive area. So if you come in and you're just mediocre, like it's hard to attract fans. Like everyone wants their team to do well. So if you're going to be mediocre, you're going to be average, then it's hard to get people enthusiastic and to get them to latch on straight away. So I think making the finals would be big because it means they got their recruitment right. They had the benefit of having the extra year. They had a lot more time than someone like a Western United did to plan their recruitment. They had their coach lined up way, way earlier. They had players signed up last year. Who was it? Tommy Orr, I think. How early?
He was the first one, and then they announced Milligan really far in advance, Federici really far in advance, Susueta and Escoberia very far in advance.
Tommy Orr, I think he was announced halfway through the last season. Like he still had half of his Central Coast Mariners games to play. So they had that big advantage in so much time to recruit and build this team, and I think they have done a really, really good job of doing it. But if they can then if they go on to sort of squander that advantage, I think that's going to be a huge missed opportunity. They've been very inconsistent so far this season. They seem to have one good result followed by a terrible one. One step forward, one step back. So I think them doing well, I think they'll keep building as the year goes on. But them making finals, top 4 should be their goal. I think on paper, pretty much everyone would agree that is a top 4 A-League side. That should be it. It really helps sort of get the fan base involved, get them engaged. We saw what happened with Western Sydney when they were so successful in their first season. And the Red and Black Block and all the Wanderers faithful at the moment, they're just so passionate. Macarthur want to try to replicate that for sure.
Yeah, full disclosure, I don't think they're going to go top four. I think they'll go top six, but it's the same kind of criticism I've got of a few clubs at the moment where there's just like a tactical inflexibility. Like they try and do their thing, and if their thing doesn't work, they don't change. They just keep trying to do their thing in the hope that they might have better success. Good example was the most recent game against Melbourne City, where they just kept trying to play the same way, and it was like wasn't working. They couldn't beat the press. But anyway, and the reason I also say that is because there's two clubs that we're going to go into now that arguably are outside the top kind of two spots, but look like they're starting to pick up that momentum and head north on the table. The first of which is, of course, the reigning defending Sydney FC champions and premiers last year, looking to make it the third year in the row. Is that first year that someone's gone 3 years in a row for a grand final win if they do that this season? I'm trying to think that out loud. I think
Brisbane?
that's correct. No, I don't think Brisbane did it in a row. I think Western Sydney snuck in for one premiership title or something like that. It's either premiership or championship. I should know. I should have done better notes, but I haven't. But what I've gone with is best ever ACL finish for Sydney. Arguably, and I think even their fans would agree, that the ACL is probably the one competition that they've consistently underperformed in each season. Arguably a team that has been as stable in terms of its core. Their defensive structure has been largely the same for the last 5 seasons. Their midfield's been pretty consistent. Their forward line has some issues, but they're working that out at the moment. The real challenge for them is how do they become a team that consistently gets out of their group at an ACL level? If they're going to keep qualifying, they need to try and get some better results. I think it's a big looming spectre for Sydney FC that their noisy neighbours out of there in the West have performed very well in this competition. I think there's also kind of, a record of other sides getting to the knockout stages a little bit better as well. It probably hurt them quite a bit that Melbourne Victory made it to the knockout rounds during the most recent off-season hub, given how poor Melbourne Victory have been during this season. Obviously, ACL, the draw can actually make or break you depending on what teams you get in there with you, but you'd think Sydney FC couldn't be happy with any of their ACL performances throughout the year. And as far as like the coefficient goes, we need to start getting more Australian sides into the knockout stages or we're going to lose our places because they're adding more teams, they're adding more countries, all that sort of stuff. Branson, Sydney FC can be tough to find a headline for. What do you think about this one and what other stuff do you think they might need to work on for the rest of the year?
I think this one's pretty spot on. I totally agree with the sentiment that you've discussed there. I think one of their biggest, not issues, but one of the biggest things that their rivals in Western Sydney have always had over them is we've won the Asian Champions League. Doesn't matter, and I love it. This is sort of like that kind of petty fan rivalry. I'm a big fan of it personally. Sydney can be like, 5-time champions, 4-time premiers or whatever. But Western Sydney go, but you haven't won the ACL. So I think for them, from that kind of point of view, it would eliminate the bragging rights that Western Sydney have over them. Another thing as well that I think is them doing well in the ACL would be huge for Australian football overall. Like when you look at the way that Sydney have dominated the A-League over the past 3 years, then they go to the ACL and they can't get out of the group stage. What does that say about the state of Australian football? We're the best team. You could argue that they are the best team at the moment, like in the entire existence of the A-League, up there with, Melbourne Victory in the early days, up there with Raw Salona in those 3-year period, one of the greatest teams ever. And they just can't progress against some of these, not mediocre, but some of these teams who aren't necessarily the champions of the J League, the champions of the K League, the champions of the Saudi League. So the best in Australia can't compete with the not best of other Asian teams. If you get what I'm trying to say, I can't try to think of a nicer way to put that, but the best team in Australian football, arguably ever, can't succeed in Asia, that is a concern, not just for Sydney, because, they're trying to tick off everything. They're trying to be the biggest club in Australian football, most premierships, most titles. Their W League team's very successful as well. So they've got a lot of boxes ticked. The ACL is the only one that they've still got unchecked. So not only for them would that sort of tick that off from their checklist and get one up on their rivals, but it would just sort of signify for Australian football as well that the best team we have can compete against some of these other, powerhouses of Asia.
Yeah, and it's no coincidence that the one time Australians won it, we won it with a very defensively sound squad, and a squad that was very much designed to defend first and win the football games or score second, and that usually sets you up better for tournament style competitions than it does for the league itself. So it's a very different beast for Sydney to be so dominant domestically, and I'd echo the same sentiment as you, where they're in that conversation because they've been so consistent in the makeup of their squad. Like even the 3 Brisbane Roar championship winning sides, they were very different year to year. Like Berisha joined halfway through, Broich was kind of in and out of the side. They had a few different parts, including like Barbarousis, John Carlos Solizano was involved there. Like if you go back to that initial team, it's very different to the team that actually wins the third one a couple of years down the track. The Sydney side has been largely the same, with a few different like accompanying players being slightly different. Nikovic is the consistent one, but Bo's been in and out. Mijewski was in there for a season or two where he just smashed the entire league. Holosko, a few other players as well. The portion that I think is super important for them is if we go into like a hub style model, can they develop and change their game plan to suit that hub style tournament, World Cup kind of football tournament? And that'll be a challenge for them. But I think in certainly the case for the Australian sides, if there is a hub towards like April or May or June or whenever it is, it's probably going to be June. I don't know why I said April, but June, July. Can they actually set themselves up sufficiently to, one, have completed a decent domestic season and then also have a really good tournament and try and get as far as they can? Go for it, Bren.
Yeah, just very quickly. So I've looked up the Premiership or Grand Final winners. I always get the champions and premiers confused. Anyway, having all sorts of fun over here, Sean. One of my headphones has stopped working. I'm sneezing during the show. We're persevering. We're getting through it. The Raw won 3 grand finals in 4 years. So
Yes.
they never made 3 in a row. So they won 2. Then the Mariners beat Western Sydney. Then Raw won the year after. So 3 out of 4, but not 3 in a row. And then just very, very quickly, another thing with sitting on the ACL as well was you compare them to the Melbourne Victory. Like last year, the Victory finished 11th. This year, they're 12th. They're absolutely nowhere, but they got out of the group stage. And, there's, of course, different teams and different groups and different circumstances. The Victory might have had a softer group or whatever. You could argue that for ages. But at the end of the day, the Victory, who finished 11th and are now 12th, got further in the ACL than one of the best teams in A-League history. So for Sydney, ACL, huge goal. Next frontier for them.
Perfect. All right, moving to another side with very lofty ambitions, and obviously we have to acknowledge our bias immediately. It is Melbourne City. Now, I could have picked 10 or 12 different headlines as far as I'm concerned for what they need this season. Arguably, the biggest one that I've ignored is that they need some sort of domestic silverware, be it a league title or a championship, but you can't say that for every side. So what I've gone with, Branson, and you might hate this one, being a proud Northern Suburbs boy, South East Stadium given green light. I think basically the big news that's coming out from Melbourne City this season is that they're transitioning their existing already elite world-class facility in the Bundoora Preston area down to the southeastern suburbs, down towards Dandenong, who've been looking for like some sort of representation at an elite level of any sport for quite a few seasons. They have started that transition down to Casey Fields, where the W League team has tried to have a couple of matches down at Dandenong City's ground that have been cancelled because some douchebag went and did donuts on the ground a couple of weeks before. They have also started transitioning their youth league or their MPL2 squads down there to start a training base. So almost like the club's been split in half, so to speak, where the A-League side is still continuing to train out of the Bundoora location, the W League and youth and academy programs are starting to transition down to Casey. The last little piece, A-League will be down there as of next season, we already know that, but the last little piece would be if that Southeastern Stadium, a stadium in Dandenong that was really the sticking point that prevented Team 11 getting a bid ahead of Western United, can be resolved. They can find a resolution between a combination of maybe club and government funding to get that location and really maybe even leapfrog Western United to be the first A-League club to build their own stadium. I think the things that we've spoken about, and it's a recurring theme throughout this one, is like club identity. If they become the first club to transition, like move a club effectively within the league, which we haven't seen happen at any point, relocate from one, albeit still within Melbourne, but from one metropolitan hub to another, and then at the same time also build a stadium to match that and like really have their own access to their own ground, that would be huge. And a new standard to be set for Australian football outside of the trophies and all that sort of stuff. Obviously, we would both love Branson to be heading to a grand final at the end of the season, but what, from your opinion, do you think are the big headlines that we'd like to see from Melbourne City this year?
Well, I'll touch on the one that you've got there first. I think that is a big deal as well. I think that would be huge for Melbourne City. As you said, I'm from the northern suburbs. I live probably 8 minutes away from their Bundoora base at the moment. So them relocating to Dandenong, for me, it's slightly annoying, but I know that is a very selfish point of view for the benefit of the club, the future of the club. Dandenong and the Southeast is going to be their base. Love it or hate it for me. Anyway, I'll get over it. I'll still support the club. That's all right. I'll drive a little bit further. Anyway,
I'll give you a lift, mate. You don't have to drive. I'll come pick you up.
That'll be good. We'll carpool. Anyway, we're getting off. I could get anyway. Back on it. I think this is going to be huge. I think it would be huge. I believe, and there's absolutely nothing to back this up, but I think that there has to be a stadium deal as part of their move down there. I don't think they would have moved if they didn't not have a guarantee, but have very, very, very strong assurances that a stadium was in the future. Otherwise, I don't see the point as to why they would go there when they already had an established base in Preston and in Bundoora. That's just my personal view. So I think that a stadium would be massive. As you said, if they could get one up on Western United and get in before then, that would be huge. But then also being able to compete with that as well. I'm so flustered, mate, because I'm excited. I think this is going to be massive for them. Because Melbourne City, they've spoken about identity crises. Who do they appeal to? I think a stadium would be a huge, huge, huge part of solidifying that and solidifying that base. It could also provide a model for a club like Brisbane, who are looking to relocate, as you said, to a potential different metropolitan hub. Could provide a good model for them as well. So something that they could follow there. The alternate headline, and again, mate, you're nailing these. You're nailing the main ones and the alternate one. The big one for me, for City, that I thought you were going to go for was the silverware. They have to win something this year. They absolutely have to. They are the strongest they've ever been. We've seen them beat Sydney. We've seen them destroy MacArthur. We've seen them destroy the Victory. They've won 4 in a row. We were critical as fans earlier on when they had the week where they lost 3 games to Newcastle, the Mariners, and Perth. I was very concerned that it was 1 step forward last year, 2 steps back. It seems like they are now on track to continue that trajectory up. They need to get something to show for it. They need to finish on top. I think grand final, for me, take it or leave it. Grand finals are hard to win. When it comes down to 90 minutes, anything can happen. We saw that when Sydney beat Perth on penalties. The better team in Perth didn't necessarily win. When the Victory beat Newcastle, the better team didn't necessarily win. So anything can happen in a grand final, but I think that, as the league goes on, the best team rises to the top. So for Melbourne City, that's finishing on top. If they do that, that's going to be a huge plus for them. I think that is their main major headline.
Yeah, absolutely. And it would be, there's a little arrogant part of me that would love to have 2 world-class training facilities built before Victory has one. Then we can sell them the shittier of the 2. That's fine. They can have Bundoora. That's no drama at all. But yeah, I'd echo the same sentiment. I think silverware is key and important. I would take a premiership, even if we do lose the championship, because we've seen this season with a couple of late flight backs and fade outs and that sort of stuff. We haven't got all of the Melbourne heart out of our system yet, where, big games
tend to be too easy.
Exactly. That'd be too easy. So yeah, definitely getting some sort of domestic silverware to really kind of get that monkey off the club's back. But I think the exciting off-field moves, arguably, I think the future is brightest for Melbourne City of all the A-League clubs, given the different things that they're trying to do and given that a lot of the issues that we've highlighted for other teams and other clubs have kind of already been resolved, and now all they need is that final piece, which is, the division title to come with it. But speaking of, there are quite a few other clubs that could also really kind of use some silverware at the moment, and we will get more into that with our next club, which is we head across to South Australia and Adelaide United. They have been arguably the most inconsistent side away from home of anyone so far, but they are starting to get a handle on it. I think we spoke about at the start of the season, Brand, in a lot of our season previews, inexperienced coaches having lessons to learn throughout the course of the year. We already mentioned Paddy Kisnorbo. We've mentioned a few of the other coaches as well. Carl Vart, I think, is now starting to figure out exactly what is his best side to set up away from home and his best side at home. Obviously, Craig Goodwin's signing's been huge for them. It looks like that's really galvanised the team. But I have gone with the headline of Young Reds Find Balance because they've unearthed quite a few players over the last few seasons. The likes of Mohamed Toure, Al Hassan Toure, now Kusini Yengi, who we might talk about a little bit further in our match previews. They've got a good young group of players coming through that are key and critical to that side. That's not including the likes of Louis Dorigo, who we forget all the time is only 19 years of age, and a few defenders. Noah Smith's been excellent. They
The goalkeeper.
the Delianov and
Yes.
Joe Gauchi, who was good on the weekend as well, his understudy. So they're bringing through quite a bit of young talent, and it is largely South Australian-based talent. Even Stefan Mork, their captain, still only 25 years of age, even though it feels like he's been around forever. So what I've highlighted is that young Reds find balance, and they get that consistency that could potentially see them challenging for a title. We know at the moment, as we spoke about with MacArthur, 1 or 2 bad results and you fall pretty far down the league at the moment, pretty much out of the 6 if they lose their next 2. So what do you think is the key for Adelaide for the rest of the season, and what do you think their fans will be looking for as a key headline?
Well, I think that balance is key. I think balance and consistency will sort of go hand in hand. They've won 4 games in a row at time of recording, which is very impressive. You know, that was, as you were saying before, when they were one of the more inconsistent teams. I think one of the big things as well would be finding a game style to really hang their hat on. Like, you know, we saw Juric, you know, he scored in his first game and that looked phenomenal. And then he struggled since then. Then he scored a hat trick of penalties against the Mariners. And then, you know, they had Craig Goodwin and he has an instant impact. And then they've got youngsters sort of coming in all over the place. So I think not only balance, but consistency, whether that's in lineup, whether that's in game plan and style. I just think that'd be really, really key.
Yeah, not that he's not quality, but it's fascinating that Juric has been out of the side for a few weeks and they've started to put together a consistent run of results. I'm starting to think potentially their style and structure and the way they want to play doesn't necessarily suit that bigger target man. It might need a bit more mobility in the front line to try and cause a bit more chaos. But that's a question for better analysts than us to survive. We might get Nick Gerver on that one for the league itself. But jumping forward to another side that has been somewhat inconsistent but is now starting to find their feet again. Western Sydney Wanderers. Now, the Robinson Revolution rolls on is the headline that I've gone with. Of course, during the off-season, Carl Robinson making the jump from Newcastle Jets, where he had a pretty decent spell after the lockdown last season, to Western Sydney as part of a bit more job security, some consistent pay structures, a longer-term deal to allow him to bring his family to Australia permanently. So that's all understandable. We're not judging that portion of it, but Western Sydney have been arguably another side that's been relatively inconsistent. I say that as they sit in 19th spot in the division. So, in second spot on the division with 19 points. Apologies.
19th spot in the 12-team league.
If there has been a late expansion to the league, we apologise that we're breaking that news too early. But they currently sit in second, 19 points, level on points with Adelaide, 1 point ahead of Melbourne City and Sydney. Such is how even the league is at present. They did have an excellent result last time out, a 4-3 victory against Wellington in an absolute cracker last weekend. And that does look like it has galvanised them a little bit. They've now picked up a few points after having a pretty rough spell. What they definitely need is some tactical flexibility as far as I'm concerned. They play that 5-3-2, 3-5-2, whatever you want to describe your wingbacks as, relentlessly. They do not change it. They just change the different players with their substitutions and whatever else, but the shape always remains the same. I think that needs to change. I think they need to have something that maybe goes to 3 up top and gets use out of some of their good wide players like Abini, like Kamea, like Mueller, like a few of the other players as well. But, Branson, what are some of your thoughts on Western Sydney's season so far? What do you think their key headline would be, given that they are sitting second in the table?
Yeah, they're a weird one because, and again, this is sort of, as we've seen with the mixed match of games played, I always thought that they would sort of slide down as other teams, caught up. And they still have played the joint most number of games in the league. So that could still happen. So they could drop down from second. But for the most part, they've managed to stay up the top. So it's a bit of a weird one for me. I think the Robinson Revolution rolls on. I think that's very good. One thing for me, and I could get savage here from Western Sydney fans as well, I'd like to see, something about their squad. It doesn't seem that they have that kind of team identity. It seems like, in particularly with strikers, they just seem to sign a new one every year. They've got Much, they've got Mueller. Names are so hard to remember today. I don't know what it is.
They've got Cox, Abidi, and Duke.
Yes.
And then Much, we should call this one out. He's a midfielder. He just keeps scoring at the moment because he's very easy. But I don't want Will Constantinides coming at you on Twitter. So we'll fire that one off early.
Oh, man. I don't know what it is today. I can't remember anyone's name. It was Craig Deans. I was going to call him Kurt Ams before. I'm like, oh my goodness.
Yeah. More on Kurt Ams later, maybe when we talk about our season previews. But
who was the guy that they signed last year? The German bloke, god of football or whatever.
God, what was his name? Alexander. It starts with an M. Maya. Maya. Maya.
Yeah. So, like, I don't know. It just seems like they're signing so many players every year and sort of so many big-ish players, and they sort of come in for a 1 year or 2 year, then they sort of fizzle. Bam Johan is another example where he comes across, big signing, sort of fizzles out, doesn't really kind of make an impact, and then they move on.
Yeah,
and
I guess
and then
part of
every
that.
year they go out and they make some good signings, and they're like, oh wow, Duke, oh wow, Abini, and you go, wow, that's great, and then they sort of fizzle out, and then next year they sort of repeat. So again, Wanderers fans, if I've got all of that wrong, I do apologize. But that, from the outside looking in, that's the impression that I get, that they're constantly chopping, they're constantly changing, they're sort of recycling through, big players and marquees, and they're not necessarily hitting and retaining those players. Hitting on a successful signing and then maintaining that going forward. So I think that sort of ties in to the Robinson revolution. And if he's able to build a consistent squad and, some manager consistency, obviously goes a long way towards that as well. But that's the impression that I have from the Wanderers. Again, they are one of the teams, full disclosure, that I know the least about. But that's the impression I get. If I've got it wrong, tell me, and I'm looking forward to learning, mate.
Yeah.
I've got to learn names. Today's a bad day for names. I don't know what's going on.
No, to be honest, I think what you said actually hit on a really interesting point where even though, so they let Marcus Babbel do his entire contract. He had his 2 year period. They saw that through. It got to the end of the season when they made the decision to head in a different direction. So now they've seemingly got a long-term vision in mind with Robinson. And to be honest, I don't know if Robinson has a great track record of bringing through young players, but you can definitely tell that from a board perspective or the club identity piece, that they want to be that team that's developing young talent and getting them into the first team and, creating the next lot of future Socceroos. That's desperately what they're trying to do. And they've been relatively committed to that, for better or worse. The challenge comes from, I think Robinson just has a habit of signing players he's worked with before, like Abini, whoever else. They did actually the antithesis to that is, at the start of the season, you might remember, they released 3 or 4 young players right on the eve of the season who ended up going back to play New South Wales MPL, where they had to do that as part of their registration requirement, so they could sign Bernie Abini and James Tracy and a few other players. Because if you can't get a surfeit of players under the age of 23 in your squad, you have to have squad spaces as part of the league registration rules. That's a little bit of football manager knowledge for you there, Brand. But it was a weird kind of reversal of roles where it looked like they were going to be very much focused on this academy structure, and that's how they're going to build for the next 2 or 3 seasons, with additional complementary pieces to try and teach those players, like a Simon Cox. Bix Duke, I think, is an excellent player and massively underrated in the division. But then they kind of flipped that on its head, and they brought in James Tracy at 35 years of age. They brought Duke back on loan. They brought in Abini, and now they're playing him up front. I think the challenge as well is some of the players that he's got, like Mueller, like a few of the midfield players, are people that were brought in by the previous coach, Marcus Babbel, that are still on contract, which is the difference between a manager contract and a player contract going for 2 seasons. So all the wingers options that he's got, like Mueller, like Kamau, they're useless because he doesn't use that in his shape or structure. And he's not really coaching to the group he's got. He's coaching to what he wants in the style and structure and trying to turn wide players. I use Abini as an example in that because I think that's his best position as a central striking option. And I think that's what makes them... They're not great, to be honest, and Western Sydney fans can come after me more than they come after you. I don't think they're great to watch. I think they're hard to beat, and that's why they sit where they are in the division. They're not a great expansive side. And I, too, kind of think that when we look at the likes of teams like Macarthur, Brisbane, Western United that are towards the bottom half of the table but have good teams and are capable of good results, Western United are one of the ones that Western Sydney, I apologise, are one of the ones that I kind of look at. I don't fear them as much, but we do play them next Friday, so hopefully they'll probably roll Melbourne City now, and I'll look like an absolute idiot, but we'll see how that goes. But it's up to them to prove us wrong. Hopefully the Robinson Revolution rolls on and they can continue having a successful season, and I think, if not for one other team, probably be the biggest surprise packet of the season so far. But we can't go any further without talking about the Central Coast Mariners, currently sitting 6 points clear at the top of the table. Yes, they do have games in hand. If Melbourne City win their 2 games in hand, they will only be 1 point clear. If Sydney FC win their game in hand, they will only be 4 points clear of them. So a little bit skewed at the moment, but they do sit at the top of the table. They have won pretty much everything that's been put in front of them at the moment. 8 wins, 1 draw, 3 defeats. I have gone with Branson. The fairy tale finds perfect finish. that is either via a league title win where they sustain this continued period where they just continue to like grind out results and win games and keeping everyone at bay, or alternatively, if they do make it through to the final series, which of course it looks like they will, getting towards the halfway point for them this season, that they can go on a bit of a run and potentially get themselves through to a grand final. I did say you can't pick like trophies for every club in the division, but I think really all Central Coast needs to kind of like finish off what has been arguably like the most unexpected season for any A-League side in the history of the competition would be like getting some sort of silverware to go along with it. But what do you think on the Mariners so far?
I think they've had a fantastic start to the year. Man, we were so wrong at the start of the year. Like I think when we did our ladder prediction, we had them finishing second bottom. We weren't fully pessimistic. We were like, oh yeah, we see some upside. We think the Jets will be worse. We don't think they're going to be very good, but there's going to be at least one team worse than them. Turns out there's a lot of teams who aren't as good as them. Even in the games they've lost, like when they lost to Adelaide, they were hard done by. So even when they haven't been winning, it seems like they've still been performing well. I think the one thing that I'll say when it comes to a fairy tale finish, I think it needs a little bit of perspective. I'm not sold on them. I love them. I agree. I love how well they're doing. I really, really do. I really hope that they finish on top. I would almost rather that they finish on top than Melbourne City. Like, obviously, I'm a Melbourne City fan, so I want them to win the league. But like purely from a storyline point of view, that would be phenomenal. So like that would be amazing. But I'm just not sold on them. I don't know what it is. Like you look at their team and you just go, I don't know. Like I'm not convinced that this is a title winning team or a grand final winning team. So I'm going to be a little bit of a Debbie Downer. For them, I think the fairy tale finds perfect finish. That is absolutely the dream headline. The more realistic thing that I think would be a bigger goal for them is not falling off a cliff. I think them making the finals, them finishing top 4, I would classify that as a fairy tale finish. Now, it might be not quite what they're hoping for considering they're on top. Obviously you're on top. Every team wants to finish on top and win silverware, but considering where they came from, 3 consecutive wooden spoons finishing on the bottom of the table being the butt of so many jokes, to then go to top 4, that in itself is a huge, huge, huge turnaround. So I think for them, the main thing that I want to see is them make the finals and then not just plateau and just sort of fade away. And then, next year we go, oh, do you remember when the Mariners were good again? So like, I don't know. It's such a tough one. I think fairy tale finds perfect finish. I think that's very good. I think maybe some certainty over their license and owners as well would be very good. The main thing, one headline that I would really love to see, and obviously it's COVID pending, but it would be Mariners sell out Gosford. I want to see a sellout crowd at a Mariners home game to watch a fantastic, exciting, dramatic, passionate Mariners team play football this season. Hopefully we can get there. Obviously for COVID-related reasons, but even if it's just like them maxing out at the COVID capacity, I want to see Gosford full again. I think that would be fantastic. We saw with their pink match how good that was. Again, another player, whose name I can't remember, hat-trick scored after 25 seconds. Is that it? Matthew
Hatch?
Yeah, got his name.
You did. You're on fire.
I should have stuck with it. First thought, best thought. Anyway, there's so many great storylines from the Mariners this year. So I think it would just be fantastic to see the fans get around them as well, because their attendance has dropped off. The brass band is gone. I don't even know, do they still have an active area group? I don't know. I think it would be fantastic to see the Mariners community re-emerge and get back in there. I think that in itself would be a fairy tale. Obviously they won silverware, but I think making the finals and having one like full house would be phenomenal for them, considering where they've come from.
A full house in a home grand final is probably like to happen. Look, I agree with you. I do. But I've thought that since round 3, and they continue to win, and they continue to be 6 points clear, and they continue to prove me wrong. So now I'm starting to think like the day that I start backing them and thinking that they're going to go all the way is the day that it will all fall apart for them. So like, shout out to our Mariners fans, shout out to Carly and Marty and everyone else who's very active and supportive on Twitter. But yeah, like I do see a ceiling on it. Like Matt Simon and Olo Bazanic, they're both in their 30s. They're both in like career best form as far as the A-League is concerned. Can they do it for a whole season? Can the supporting players of like 20 and 21-year-olds that are underrated throughout the rest of the division continue to play out of their skin? Can Alukual continue to come off the bench and find ways to score in games, even though he never starts? It's just like
Birigitti's been fantastic.
Birigitti's been phenomenal. Like their whole defensive line, Ruin Tonic looks like a different player to what he was at Melbourne City. Kyle Rouse looks like he's finally making the most of his potential. The community's getting around him. Congrats to them, as you mentioned, on I think it was over $30,000 raised for Pink Round last time out. Like it feels at the moment like, when is the run going to come to an end? And that's so unfair on them because they've been so excellent and they've obviously worked incredibly hard to get to this point, and everyone continues to kind of, even ourselves, we're guilty of it, like call it a fairy tale. It's not really that fairy tale. It's probably the result of a very, very good coaching structure, and huge credit to Alan Stajic. And then it's also probably like a really lot of hard work for that players and those groups, knowing what they've come from last season, what they've all gone through as a like group together, losing all those games throughout that period to now be in like a winning mentality. Fantastic. Long may it continue, but yeah, I'm kind of in the same boat where I do think it's going to fall out at some point.
And just very quickly, so the Mariners at the moment, right? So we're 12 games in. Hang on, let me pull up the right tab here. So they're on 25 points already. That already is the most points they've had in a season since 2013, 2014.
Crazy.
2014-15, they only had 23 points. So their points totals at the end of the season have been 23, 13, 23, 20, 13, 18. Over the last 6 years and 12 games in, they've already eclipsed that. I mean, I'm with you. They've already proven me wrong. They proved me wrong after like 4 games. I was like, they're just going to keep on doing it. And I really, 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 really hope that they continue to do it. But I don't know. I still just can't see it happening. They've proved me wrong already. They keep just going, well, screw you, Bram. We're just going to keep winning then. And you're going to look like a fool on the podcast. So I'm like, yeah, joke's on you guys. I do that myself anyway. But yeah, I don't know. I can't sing enough praises. They're so fantastic. Pick a storyline. What fantastic storyline do you want to pick? There's 10 of them. Like, it's phenomenal.
Yeah, and they're great to watch as well. Like, I just shit on Western Sydney for not being great to watch. Central Coast Mariners are fantastic to watch at the moment. But, Branson, that does bring us to the end of our headline portion. We are going to, like, hand controls back to you. You can try and steer this sinking ship as far as how I've done so far. But we're going to jump in and do our Hall of Fame inductions.
All right, Shawno, as you said, we're going to jump straight into the Hall of Fame results here. Taking a look back to the results from the last episode, we had 3 nominations. We had the Log Pins jet ski trip returns. Of course, Stephen Taylor coming back to the Wellington Phoenix. That was part of one of the COVID lockdown prizes that were on board, and it never got to happen. That was nominated by Bill. I nominated the Brisbane Roar and their number fiasco during the Asian Champions League, the numbers peeling off, and you nominated Adelaide United for their Jeopardy music that they were playing during the VAR pauses. The results are in, mate. The Jeopardy theme came in 3rd place with 18% of the vote. Brisbane Roar number fiasco came in 2nd with 24% of the vote. So earning a spot in the Hall of Fame is the Long Pin Jet Ski Trip Reunion, or the return, I guess you could say, nominated by Bill with 58% of the vote. As far as the prizes go, I can't remember exactly how it all started, mate, but every team sort of had like special offers that they were auctioning. Oh, it was the bushfires. Sorry, it wasn't lockdown. Like auctioning off the bushfires. Is that right?
Yes. So I think it was for the bushfires, and then they did something, but now they're going to try and get it back on board. So the overarching story is that Stephen Taylor apparently will go to training during the day, and then the rest of his afternoons every day in Wellington he spends on his jet ski, and he convinced like David Ball and Gary Hooper to buy them as well. And he's just like this half kind of like, I don't know if he's getting commission on these sales, but I don't think anyone in Wellington and the Wellington area has been more responsible for the increase in jet ski ownership than Stephen Taylor, old Long Pins himself, has.
Yeah, exactly. And all the different clubs had different things that they were auctioning off. And obviously, Stephen Taylor being a jet ski enthusiast, the Wellington one was like to get to ride with him. But then like COVID happened, everything happened. He left the club. It never ended up actually eventuating. But now that he's back, apparently it's on the cards. And that is, of course, incredibly exciting, mate.
Excellent. I hope the winner gets to enjoy it, and I hope they auction it off again this year, because I think it'd be a fantastic reward again for anybody.
Absolutely. What we're going to do now, though, is throw out our nominations to see who else is going to be joining Stephen Taylor's jet ski and the rest of the crew in the Reserve Team Hall of Fame, mate. I'm going to let you go first. Who are you nominating?
So mine's more of a rallying call, I think, than an actual nomination this season. So you might have seen this across Twitter. There's been a few different nominations coming through. But basically, the FFA Cup is undergoing a rebranding process, and they're not just going to go with the generic FA Cup. There are a lot of people calling for a few different names. I'm going to nominate this and then also hope that it wins the naming rights for the FFA Cup, right? So the big one that people have been describing is to either call it the Australia Cup as a big one, to try and like tie it back to the old Australia Cup competition in the 60s and 70s. That was the national cup competition at that particular point. But then the other one that's been coming up as well, and it's my nomination, is the Les Murray Cup. I think that would be fantastic. For me, like as one of those kids, and this may be showing my age gap with you, Bran, growing up where mainly like the soccer coverage was the World Game on Saturday mornings on SBS, and it was Les Murray like as the host of that program. We saw like the likes of Craig Foster, Simon Hill, whoever else get their first real football opportunities on that location. And then in addition, the likes of like Johnny Warren, who's got like a long history as being the main Socceroo. He now has the Johnny Warren medal at the end of the season for the best A-League player. I think it would be a fantastic way to kind of recognise contributions from outside the playing group, which can also be a bit of a challenge when it comes to naming rights for actual games, but to just recognise Les Murray's contribution to the game. I have seen other shout-outs for like Raul Rasic and a few other Socceroos coaches, all that sort of stuff. I think the Les Murray Trophy or the Les Murray Trophy as part of the Australia Cup would be absolutely perfect. So that's what I'm naming as my nomination for this week, in the hope that the same people that may vote for this in the Hall of Fame poll will then go and put it forward as being one of the options and nominations for the FFA Cup trophy name. I think that would be absolutely fantastic to draw both the Australia Cup and our previous history together, and then also pay tribute to one of the, not players, but one of the people that I think has had incredibly, just a massive contribution to the way that he continued to grow the game when nobody else would, and give him a bit of a shout out for his lineage in the game and get him a place in the Australian sporting landscape, particularly the football landscape, alongside Johnny Warren. I think that would be absolutely fantastic for them both to have awards that, we're competing for each and every season. So that's the one that I'm going with. I don't think I've stolen yours.
No, not quite. You're going to make me feel bad, though, because my nomination is on a totally different track, whatever you want to call it. I'm in a different lane here. So I'm going to touch on yours because yours is more serious than mine first. I think that's a fantastic idea. I think one of my favourite parts about seeing the ideas for the name for the trophy is just seeing some of the fantastic Australian football names that are being put forward. People who have had such an impact on this game, across the NSL, across the Socceroos, across the A-League. It's just fantastic to see some of these names pop up. And there's so many nominations as well. You read through some of the names. Like there's so many people who you could put as the name of the trophy. And I think that's fantastic. I think it's a great way to celebrate the soccer, the football history in this country. And I think this is just a very wholesome, very positive, very exciting, great conversation to be having. Really sort of harks back to the roots of what makes football great in this country. And I think that's fantastic.
Yeah, I should be clear as well. Yep. I didn't come up with that name. I'm just trying to rebroadcast it so it gets momentum and all that sort of stuff. I think Joey Lynch was the first one Joey Lynch suggested that the trophy has a name, but then it's called the Australia Cup, like the overall competition. And then it might have been Mikey Mifsud, who is a fan of the show and like a friend of the channel and all that sort of stuff. So shout out to both of them as well for being the originators. I'm just trying to signal broadcast or signal boost this one to hopefully get it out to some of our fans as well to get behind it.
Stephen Paletti and Neil Simons, both part of the reserve team. I both saw them tweet it out. Again, I don't know who's first. And I totally agree on what you were saying with Joey Lynch. So, like, for example, the Super Bowl, it's called the Super Bowl, but then the trophy is the Vince Lombardi trophy. So the trophy has a name, but then the final or the competition has a name as well. So I think that's perfect. The Australia Cup, and then you win the Les Murray trophy. I think that ties in very well. Now, okay, changing track here, because I thought we were going back to our classic sort of bit of banter Hall of Fame Twitter nomination. So my nomination We might have to put it off the pod. I don't know how well these are going to compete here, but my nomination is the bloke. There's a great photo of Ulysses De Vere and the Wellington Phoenix crew in Wollongong. It's him in front of the fans. He's giving everyone a thumbs up. He's not the one I'm nominating. I'm nominating a bloke in the background who's in there in his Mexican fan gear, and he's holding up a sign saying, "Please approve my wife's visa." I think he deserves a spot in the Hall of Fame because full credit to him for just shooting his shot. He's at the A-League game. He's got a sign. I don't know if he wrote it while he was at the game or if he fully brought it, to hold up in the broadcast or whatever. But it's just fantastic. Like, it's totally random. Shooting your shot. I mean, way to get publicity out there. I'm sure his wife appreciates it. If she's a big fan of the A-League, she sees that going around. That's a great way to get to generate attention. So he's my nomination for because peak A-League. We throw that around a lot, but it is a classic A-League moment. Here's a player engaging with his fans in a totally different city during COVID lockdown, and then there's a bloke just there saying, "Please approve my wife's visa." Absolutely love it. He's my nomination for the Hall of Fame, and I can see you laughing, man. We're on different wavelengths here this week for our nominations. So I'm not sure if they can go head to head.
Only because I haven't seen that. So we will. No, I haven't seen it. So it didn't come across because I follow Wellington Phoenix, but I don't follow De Vere independently, if that makes sense. So I'm going to have to go and find it. This might be one of those, when we put out the Twitter poll accompanying this podcast release later this evening, maybe I have to go and find the photo so that people have visual references to put alongside that one. Fantastic. The Mexican cheer squad's already in, and they are continuing to just add more and more to their, I don't know, what's the word, history or lineage each and every week with the stuff that they're doing. So both fantastic shouts. I would be absolutely fine with the man trying to get his wife a visa via Fox Sports Broadcasting, which we know that no legislators and politicians are watching, but fantastic nomination, Branson. I'm all for it.
Yeah, it's just on a little bit of a different track. As soon as you read yours out, I was like, oh no, you've gone for a very heartfelt sentimental. Not to say that, this bloke trying to get his wife approved for a visa, that's not heartfelt and sentimental, but different wavelengths, different themes here. But two great nominations. We might just have to induct them both for two separate reasons. Who knows?
Love conquers all, brand. You might have it this week.
That's it. We'll see what happens. But, mate, we are going to move on from the Hall of Fame now. We're going to do a preview of this weekend's footballing fixtures. Alrighty, taking a look at the W League to start off with. So we've got a big weekend of W League action coming up. The first game we're going to talk about, Perth Glory against Melbourne City, coming up on Friday, 9:30 p.m. Australian Eastern Daylight Savings Time. Battle of the Cellar Dwellers, Sean. Bit of a tongue twister. Got there in the end. What are you anticipating from this one, mate?
It's really the last chance for Perth Glory to avoid the wooden spoon. They've got 1 point so far from their 9 games this season. They are the one club with the most remaining fixtures. They've got 3 games to go, all of which taking place over the next 10 days. This is the second last weekend of the W League season, but I think it is actually the last fixture for Adelaide United. This will take them to 12 games. I think it's potentially the last fixture for Western Sydney as well with their midweek tie, Melbourne Victory and Brisbane. I don't think Brisbane are actually playing until Wednesday, so I haven't included Brisbane here, but they are playing midweek. So Perth Glory's 3 fixtures. They need 2 wins from those final 3 fixtures to finish above Melbourne City and potentially also drag Newcastle Jets back into that conversation as well, though the goal difference swing would be massive if that was to change. So being in Perth is a huge advantage for Perth Glory. The point that they picked up against Melbourne Victory earlier this season was in Perth. Their better performances this season, including against Canberra United last time out, despite going down to 10 women. That's a big advantage, but I can't go past Melbourne City with this one. They have 2 wins for the season against Melbourne Victory and Newcastle Jets in their most recent game. They've had a poor year. I think they're going to be looking to try and close out their season in as positive a manner as possible. And potentially, if they win their 2 remaining games and get a big goal swing, they could catch Western Sydney Wanderers and finish as high as 6th position, which I'm sure they'll be desperate to do. So I'm going to go with Melbourne City in this one, but it would not shock me if Perth Glory keep the dream alive and beat Melbourne City and make it a really difficult final weekend of fixtures coming into next week.
Definitely. And I agree as well. It's hard to go past Melbourne City, not because they've looked fantastic, but Perth, they really have struggled this season. A lot of factors into that, the COVID lockdowns and border situations, everything that's gone into them full credit to them for the way that they have been able to play and compete this season. However, they're just not on the same level. I do think Melbourne City will get over the line. And you touched on it as well. The City have 2 games remaining, both against Perth. It's a great chance for them to really sort of climb the ladder, to get ahead of Newcastle, potentially catch Western Sydney as well. That would be huge. Obviously, things have not gone the way they wanted this season. So I think that'd be great for City to try to climb up the table there. The next game, though, Sydney FC taking on Melbourne Victory. Sydney FC with a chance to clinch the title here, Sean. What do you see happening?
I'd see them getting it. So this is part of a back-to-back double big blue fixture where the W League side is playing in advance of the A-League team. I desperately hope, and this is like a huge call out to the Sydney FC fan base, if they've potentially got a side that's about to secure a league title, if they don't get a good crowd down for the W League game beforehand, given it's at the same venue, on the same day, silverware on the line against arguably their biggest historical opponent in Melbourne Victory, then like the Sydney FC and the Co fan base is absolutely dead. They can go fuck themselves for not getting around the W League side. So I think Sydney FC will get beyond there. But if they don't get a good crowd, if there isn't that support there, if there isn't that raucous atmosphere to try and support that side through, given that it is still a very successful Sydney FC side, and I still think even if they don't win this weekend, they will win the league title. Like, you know, it's a young group, so they need all the support they can get to really like kind of get themselves through. I think they will win this match. I think Melbourne Victory have been on a downward spiral for a little while, starting with that defeat against Brisbane Roar. But they are up into 3rd position, having beaten Perth during the week, and they've got another game coming up against Perth next weekend as well before the season finishes. So Melbourne Victory still in the top 3, still an outside chance to finish in 2nd spot, still an outside chance if every other result goes their way to actually win the division somehow mathematically, but that would require Sydney FC losing their last 2 games. It would require Brisbane Roar to lose their last game heavily as well. I don't think any of that's going to happen. I think Sydney FC are going to win this one and secure the league title for the season.
I agree. I think Sydney will win. However, you know, you said the Victory have been in a bit of a downward spiral. They've won 4 of their last 5. Since that 6-0 thumping at the hands of Brisbane. So it is a tricky opponent, and, you know, there's nothing better, there will be nothing better, for the Victory than to be the spoilers, you know, to spoil one of their biggest rivals, you know, chance at a championship. That's huge motivation in itself. And as you said, that, you know, they still have some stuff to play for, even if it does seem like an outside chance. Sydney, they lost to Adelaide. They've got 2 tough games against the Victory and then Canberra United. If I was a Sydney fan, I would be a little bit nervous. 2 tricky oppositions. I do think they will get the job done against the Victory, though. Taking a look to the next game, Newcastle Jets taking on Canberra Saturday at 6:30 p.m. The Jets, mate, they sit in 7th, 2 wins so far. Canberra United, they have still got a chance to make the finals. It's, practically a must-win for them. How do you see this one playing out?
A must-win for Canberra. They have rallied a couple of times. They were up against Perth, and they had a fantastic turnaround, albeit playing with a man advantage, player advantage, woman advantage. I think Canberra will win to keep their finals hopes alive. They've got 2 games in hand. This is the current scenario, Brand. So Melbourne Victory, Adelaide United, Canberra United competing for the last 2 spots in the top 4. Mathematically, Sydney FC and Brisbane can't drop out. Victory in the box seat, 2 games remaining. They sit on 20 points. Adelaide United, 1 game remaining, which we're going to talk about in a moment, on 19 points. And Canberra United, 2 games remaining on 18 points. If they win this one and Melbourne Victory lose, they'll go back above them into 3rd spot, pushing Adelaide down, potentially with the next match coming up, Adelaide to win and get back in. My heart wants Canberra United and Adelaide United in the finals, not because I hate Melbourne Victory, I just think that they've been better stories and play a better brand of football. So I'm going to back Canberra to win this one, and I'm probably going to back in the next match as well, just to give you a future spoiler, Adelaide United to win their game and give it pretty much all to play for going to the last week. It's going to be a roller coaster, this one, because so many different results in back-to-back games are going to determine top 4 finishes in finals football for a lot of these teams.
Yeah, definitely. It's going to be a huge finish. And as you said, like, that just sort of shows the significance of the importance of Adelaide United's, their win over Sydney FC last weekend as well, puts them on the front foot. Now Canberra have to go out. They have to beat the Jets. I agree that I think they will, but then they have to go out and beat Sydney as well the weekend after. So that'll be interesting, because then we could see, if Sydney don't get over the line, we could see a title decider where both teams have everything to play for. Canberra trying to get into the finals, Sydney trying to win the league.
Yeah.
So that would just be fascinating, mate.
And if Melbourne Victory gets something against Sydney FC, that could actually go the other way where Canberra don't have anything to play for anymore. They need to, Canberra United needs to win both their games, and they need to hope that Sydney FC can do them a favour and beat Melbourne Victory this weekend. And then next week, Sydney FC rolls over and just lets Canberra United win so that they make the final. So I do want Canberra in there. Yeah, or
Western Sydney beat Adelaide.
That's the other portion that I thought we were going to segue nicely into. I was trying to lowball you one there to move into, but yeah.
No, that's okay. We've got there in the end. I wanted to go... Anyway, we got there in the end.
Yeah.
You threw me a segue and I went a different way with it. That's okay. But yeah, so Western Sydney against Adelaide. So that's going to be fascinating as well. So obviously Western Sydney are eliminated from the finals. They can't make it, but they can be the spoilers for Adelaide United. If Adelaide United win, does that guarantee them a final? I'm looking at the table now, 22.
No.
It doesn't guarantee them, but it puts them in a very strong position.
Puts them in a strong position, but again, similar to Canberra, they'd need Melbourne Victory to lose one of their last 2 games, and they need Canberra to not win their remaining 2 games. That's the challenge. So if Adelaide win and go into the top 4, Adelaide will be cheering their little hearts out for Sydney FC next weekend. If they don't, then that pretty much probably wraps up their season as well.
Yeah.
Adelaide
looking at the table, trying to do the math in my head. They get 3, that puts them on 22, then Canberra gets 6. But hang on, anyway. So it won't guarantee them a spot, but it puts them in a very strong position.
But they could win this game and still not make finals if other results don't go their way. And that's the challenge for Adelaide. And they deserve better because they've been, I think, the most exciting team to watch throughout the course of this season. Their attacking style is very, very good. So, I'm backing Adelaide. They're very good at home as well, Branson. So I would assume they're going to finish the season in as strong a position as possible. But again, and it's a cruel game sometimes, football, other results have to go their way for them to finish top 4.
Yeah, it's going to be a fascinating finish. Plenty to play for so many teams, and it could still play out so many different ways. Very much looking forward to it. Make sure to get your eyes on the W League this weekend, and City fans. As Sean said, I'll put it a little bit more politely, but please do turn out. It is a fantastic opportunity to get out and support women's football, the W League, and your own club. So hopefully there is a huge turnout in Sydney for that game. We are going to move on now, Shauno, to the A-League fixtures. Let's have a look. Alrighty, so the first one that we're going to talk about is coming up. Western Sydney Wanderers taking on Perth Glory on Friday at 7 p.m. How do you see this one playing out? This is going to be interesting. Perth, do they have a shot?
Perth don't travel well, and they haven't figured out anything other than just setting themselves up with 4 up front, and that's proving costly. The result against Central Coast, I think, is a little bit of misnomer. The draw from earlier this week, where it looked like maybe they were a bit more stable. It was the toughest conditions of any game this season. It was an absolute downpour before that game kicked off. Kurt Ames got it wrong again and actually probably should have chalked off Perth Glory's go-ahead goal for eventually Matt Simon's equaliser. So I don't think Perth have found a solution that works to go and travel to difficult areas. And I think Bankwest is starting to turn into a bit of fortress for Western Sydney, not because they're destroying teams, but because they're so difficult to break down. We've seen a couple of good results for them there, and they seem to be, again, one of these sides that is a bit better suited defensively when they're playing at home than they are away. So I think home ground advantage is going to tell quite a bit in this one, and I'm backing Western Sydney to get a good result.
Interesting. I agree. I think Western Sydney will get the job done as well. There's been some crazy weather up in New South Wales at the moment. On Thursday night, there was an NRL game, the Parramatta Eels playing the Melbourne Storm at Bankwest. It was pouring down with that. The pitch got chewed up. It'll be interesting to see if that plays a factor, if it rains again. But that'll be a fantastic, fascinating and fantastic matchup. We'll see what goes on there. The next game, though, Macarthur FC taking on Western United on Saturday at 5 p.m. Who do you see coming out on top on this one, mate?
If Diamante starts Western United, because they're actually starting to put together a good little run of form. They're actually starting, I think, to build the momentum that they didn't have in the early part of the season, where, fixtures kept getting changed on them very late. Of the 3 Victorian sides, their fixturing was the most impacted due to their considerations for actually booking a venue to play at. So if he starts, I see them winning because they're a different team when he's on the park, as we saw late on in their most recent fixture. If he doesn't, I see Macarthur maybe getting 3 points here and jumping a little bit further up the table.
Yeah, well, there's plenty to play for Western United as well, because if they win this game, they'll actually go ahead of Macarthur as well. I think Macarthur have a slight edge. I think they're a better team than Western United. Obviously, the Diamante cloud, as you mentioned there, mate. But I'm looking forward to watching this one. Another one we're looking forward to watching is the Big Blue Sydney FC taking on the Melbourne Victory Saturday night at 7:10 p.m. Is this going to be an ugly one for the Buck?
Yes, but the thing that might save them that you just kind of alluded to is apparently because of the where this one's being played, because it's got a W League game against it, if it's raining that day, we know that weather can sometimes be the great equaliser, and we know that Melbourne Victory play a very agricultural style of football, which could actually be suited to more wintry and colder conditions. So, yeah, it depends. There is also that lightning risk that you kind of called out where people have highlighted there is a big thunderstorm scheduled for Saturday night. I think tonight's fixture's okay from the weather scheduling. I think tomorrow's is an entirely different prospect. So there is potential that Victory could cause an upset. If it's not, though, like I think Sydney FC will win, but it will not shock me if the conditions are shit and Victory somehow managed to snag a draw and view that as being some sort of improvement. However, having been belted by Melbourne City, having been losing in, I think, convincing style to Adelaide United again, a third defeat against arguably their longest rivals in Sydney FC, it's not going to bode well for the rest of Melbourne Victory's season. So this one could have like long-lasting implications for the rest of the year, depending on how the result goes.
Yeah, absolutely. For the Victory, what is it? Their rivalry tour, I saw someone post on Twitter, is not going well. They lost in a derby in heartbreaking fashion to West United, then lost in another derby, got pumped by the Victory. Lost in is it the original rivalry they call it? Adelaide against Melbourne Victory 3-1, and now the Big Blue. That could be 4 big losses in a row against 4 of their biggest rivals. So it could be unfortunate. Like you, I can't see the Victory winning this one. The weather, as you said, could be a factor. That might be a saving grace for them to somehow snagging a point, but it could be another difficult result for the Victory. Another game that we're going to talk about, though, mate, the next one up is Wellington Phoenix taking on Brisbane Roar Sunday at 4 p.m. This is going to be interesting. We talked before when we were discussing Brisbane. They started like a house on fire. They lost their first game, won the next 4 in a row. They are now, though, winless in their last 6 games. They're coming up against the Wellington Phoenix side who, down the bottom of the table, they've seen a little bit of a resurgence. They've won 2 of their last 3. The one game they lost was that crazy 4-3 finish against Western Sydney where they could have won, could have drawn. It was absolutely nuts, that game. How do you see this one playing out? And are Brisbane going to snap that 6-game winless drought?
So I'm about to put myself at risk of being completely wrong. I think this is actually a doubleheader taking place in Newcastle as well, where Wellington and Brisbane are playing at 4 p.m. at McDonald Jones, and then Newcastle and Adelaide are playing at 6:40 at McDonald Jones. Quickly, even the background brand, if I explain this, you could double check if that is correct.
It's at Newcastle International Sports Centre.
Excellent.
According to Google.
Cool. So that is a doubleheader, A-League. It's the first time it's been done, which I think is because Wynn Stadium's got a double booking with like the NRL or the NPL or something like that. So that will be interesting to see if the Mexican and, as we saw last weekend, the Jewish fan bases actually continue to travel to support Wellington. If they do that, it should be quite interesting. If the Newcastle fans get around football and spending an entire day there and go down to watch the early match, that will be interesting as well. I'm picking a draw for this one. I don't think Wellington have resolved all of their issues, albeit with some improved results. I think Brisbane are kind of, they're the one side that I think started playing a very effective brand of football, and they're getting away from that for whatever reason. If certain players start to come back into fitness, like Scott McDonald, like a few other players around the park for them, that may resolve it, and they might get back to how they were at the start of the season, where they did look formidable. But right now, I just don't look at either of these sides, and I don't fear them, so to speak, when I look at the roster and when I look at the scheduling. So I think they're going to cancel each other out a bit. I think another draw, and I think Brisbane have had quite a few draws in their last 5, so I think another one's going to add to the list and maybe start increasing some pressure on them to get a good result next time out.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's going to be a tough one. I think this is going to be a good opportunity for Brisbane to sort of get back on the horse, win this in their last 6. I think, you're coming up against the Phoenix. This is a game that they really, not to say must win, but they really, really, really want to be winning to sort of try to reignite their campaign after what was a fantastic start. Moving on to the next game, Newcastle Jets taking on Adelaide United. As you said, it'll be the second game of that doubleheader. I hadn't realised that's the way it was going to go, but it's going to be fascinating to see how that plays out, how that works with fans and attendance and all that sort of stuff. How do you see this one playing out? A lot on the line for Adelaide. We were talking about the table before. If Adelaide win this, they will be just 3 points behind the Central Coast Mariners with the same number of games played. Now, of course, the Mariners will go on to play later on, but for Adelaide, a chance to really sort of close that gap to the top of the table against an opponent who you would think that they should be beating, right?
Yeah, and I think Adelaide is starting to figure out what's working well for them away from home. I think that was their big challenge. They were kind of imperious at Coopers, where they beat Melbourne City, where they got a good result against Sydney FC. Their early season form there was quite good. And then it was away from home. They were really struggling. They shipped 5 away at Perth Glory. They had a heavy defeat in Sydney against Macarthur, where Derbyshire got that hat trick. And then they've started to put together a good run of away results with the game against Melbourne Victory, with their win, the 3-2 victory against Western Sydney a couple of weeks ago. I think they'll make that a hat trick and get a third good away result in a row against a Newcastle side that is also struggling, I think. I think they're starting to kind of drop off a little bit in terms of the application they had earlier on in the year. So I'm going to back Adelaide. It would not shock me if this is completely wrong and Newcastle calls a bit of a boil over, because it just seems like it's going to be one of those fixtures with the double header and hopefully a good fan support behind the Jets on the day.
Yeah, totally agree. Where it does have a bit of a danger game element about it. You know, the Jets, for a team that sits second on the second bottom on the table, we do seem to sort of hold them, not in a high regard, but they are a difficult team to play against. They have been in a lot of games where they've lost by just a goal. So Adelaide United, 4 wins on the trot. Seems like they've turned a corner a little bit, but they'll be hoping to just, go out, get the 3 points and keep on climbing up the table. Another team that has been climbing up the table a lot has been Melbourne City. They too have won 4 games in a row. They're taking on the Central Coast Mariners on Monday at 7 p.m. This is going to be a huge game, Sean. How do you see this one playing out?
I want to back Melbourne City because they are in good form and they're arguably playing the best football they have in the Kist Norbo era. Like it is actually looking more like the team that made the grand final last season. But having said that, Central Coast are arguably the hardest working side in the division, and they will be prepped. They'll be ready to go. They'll know exactly. I think this is a weird sentence to say. There was an arrogance about Melbourne Victory where they didn't really try and resolve any of the issues or the challenges that Melbourne City were going to pose to them. I think they thought, being a derby, they would just get up and they'd want it more and that would be it. And they got absolutely belted. Macarthur, same style and strategy. Ante Milicic has been very negative in the media about the idea around changing their style and structure. He wants to go out and play that possession-based style no matter what the score is. And I don't think that was the right attitude to bring to playing Melbourne City away. I think Central Coast are better coached and intelligent enough that they will come with a very hard-working, determined style. I think Simon and Urena up front is the perfect structure and setup to really make the most of limited possession against City and cause issues on the counter and all that sort of stuff. So this could be a fascinating contest. I think the fact that Melbourne City were 2-0 up away from home and threw it away after going down to 10 men against Central Coast will be the fire that kind of aspires, pushes City to go to a higher level. I think City will win, but I think it'll be tight. It wouldn't shock me if this ended up being a draw as well, given how these two sides set up and given how difficult Central Coast are to play both home and away. I think they're arguably the most tactically flexible side in the division, as critical as I've been of everybody else. So I'm backing Melbourne City, but that's potentially maybe heart overtaking head with that one. This should be a fascinating contest no matter what.
Yeah, I think it'll be fascinating too. It's just yet another test for the Central Coast Mariners. I remember, a few podcasts ago we were talking about it being a huge test when they were playing Macarthur, being a huge test when they were playing Sydney, and they passed. Melbourne City are a team on the rise. I think this is the first time that the Mariners will have come up against a fellow title contender who is playing their best football this season. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's a fairly accurate statement to say. So if they can get a positive result away from home against a strong title contender who's playing really good football, huge result for them. Absolutely huge. One avenue that I think the Central Coast Mariners might find luck in is from set pieces. We have seen with Melbourne City throughout this season where they do look a little bit vulnerable from set pieces. Matt Simon, Kuol coming off the bench as well. His aerial threat, that could be an avenue for the Mariners. I think, as you said before, Melbourne City have plenty to prove, plenty to make up for after that 2-0 loss as well. So it'll be really interesting to see. I would tip Melbourne City. I think that at home, Melbourne City, they're trending in the right direction. They looked very good against Macarthur. They looked good against Sydney. They looked very good against the Victory. I think they'll get the job done, but I'm just looking forward to watching this. I really am. I could see it going anyway. You know, that's a terrible tip to say. I can see Melbourne City winning. I can see it being a draw. I can see the Mariners winning. I think City will, but I'm just looking forward to watching this one, mate.
Yeah, I could see it being like City are 2-0 up going into the 70th minute, and then it's a 2-2 draw at the end, and we go full Melbourne Heart. But, you know, like that's fine. It should be a fascinating contest, hopefully an entertaining one for fans around the league as well.
Absolutely. But, mate, that does bring us pretty much to the end of this week's episode of the Reserve Team podcast. Thank you very much, everyone, for listening. Don't forget to check out all of our resources. Head to thereserveteam.com.au for all our latest content and articles. There's plenty of stuff on there on the W League, on grassroots, A-League, kick culture. It's all up there. Check it out to get all your news and views from your fellow football fans. Please as well like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. It does make a difference. Give us a thumbs up if you thought we did a good job. Don't be afraid as well to leave us some comments. Hit us up on Twitter. Hit us up in the comment section below. Let us know what you think. If there's anything you disagree on, anything you agree on, or anything that you think we should talk about and explore further in the future. But Sean, mate, if people want more of your content, where can they go to find it?
Just reserveteam.com.au or youtube.com/thereserveteam. It's the best place to check out all the Australian New Zealand football content, so why would you look anywhere else?
Mate, that's it. Speaking of Australian New Zealand reserve team football content, there we go, almost muddled it. There are a couple more reserve team shows that you should check out as well. A reminder that the weekend recap is on Tuesday night, Sean, 7 o'clock on Twitch.
Yep. And live, and it's videoed on demand on YouTube. So if live streams aren't your thing, that's absolutely fine. You can catch up later in the week to hear us recap all the weekend's games.
Fantastic. That'll be the discussion points, all the hot topics, breaking down each of the results, the implications. As we said before, huge week of W League. You'll be there with Stephen to recap it all, discuss the implications, and talk about what I imagine are going to be some incredible A-League and W League games as well. And then, of course, we do have one other thing that's up on Twitch as well, our Football Manager live save going on. We are running teams in the second division. Check that out. That's on Wednesday night starting at 7 o'clock as well. We're midway through the season. One person on this podcast is doing slightly better than the other person, but that's all we'll say on that. We won't name names or anything like that or identify, anyway. We'll move on. We'll gloss over that one. But yes, there's plenty of good stuff going on at the reserve team. Thank you very much for listening, and we'll see you again soon.